The Day of the Rope by Devon Stack. Chapter 6. Eve woke up with a splitting headache. She had drunk too much wine. Why was it that wine always seemed to make her feel like she had been run over by a truck? She didn't want to open her eyes. She knew her phone was somewhere in her bed close to her head because it had been buzzing all morning. Eve's eyes flew open in a panic as she realized she wasn't 100% sure that she was even in her bed. She didn't remember coming home at all. This was not good. She surveyed her surroundings once her eyes adjusted to the dim light. This was not her room, and she wasn't lying in her bed. She cautiously sat up and looked around at a dark room she didn't recognize. She had been lying on an old beat-up couch in a room without windows. The only other furniture was a beanbag chair on the floor and the cinder blocks that were propping up a large TV in the corner. Judging by the pipes running along the ceiling, she supposed she must be in a basement apartment. When the rent had begun skyrocketing in D.C., many of the historic homes had been split into several cramped apartments. The basement units were always the least expensive. She knew this because she had looked at several when she had first moved to the area, but her fear of rats made her decide against it. Whose apartment was this? That's when she realized that she wasn't wearing any underwear. When she had first sat up, she had felt a sharp pain below the waist, but she had been so distracted by her strange surroundings and confused by the war going on between the alcohol and adrenaline in her system that the pain seemed distant and unreal. Now the pain was very real and intense. Her body began to shake. Not now, she thought. Not yet. You can have a panic attack when you get home, when you get safe, but not here. God, please not now. She shakily rose to her feet. These basement apartments all had the same basic layout because they were built underneath identical row houses that were tightly packed together above. The basements were all long and narrow with doors at either end. Finding the door would be simple. Where was her purse? Where was her phone? Ah, shit, you awake? A low voice said from behind her. Eve froze. She didn't recognize the voice. She cautiously turned around to see a black man in his 30s wearing boxers and holding a small, dirty plastic bong in his hands. Where am I? She knew she sounded stupid and helpless, which was the last thing she wanted to project right now, but she couldn't help herself. The man laughed to himself, and then, after lighting a plastic lighter, he began to take a first hit of the bong. A bong filled with a white smoke as the dirty water gurgled and frothed. The green plastic of the bong looked as if it had never been cleaned and was stained dark brown with large black chunks of burnt marijuana sticking to the sides. The man extinguished the lighter and removed the bowl from the bong and inhaled the white smoke until there was nothing left. Eve stood frozen and watched as he held in the smoke in his lungs and set the bong down. Then, pounding his fist against his chest, he exhaled an enormous cloud of smoke that triggered a coughing fit. Damn, that's some good shit, he said between coughs. He turned, without looking at her, and walked to what Eve was beginning to think was the rear of the apartment. A moment later, she heard a door close, and then a muffled voice. The tone was urgent and sounded like the man he had just seen was trying to wake someone up. Eve couldn't articulate specifically why she felt this way, but something about the tone of the voice sounded ominous. Her critical thinking was given second priority, and the fight or flight part of her brain had jumped into the driver's seat. She had to get out, now. Eve walked as quickly and quietly as she could through the dark room in the opposite direction of the voice. If the voice was in the back of the apartment, she needed to get to the front. There would be a door. All she would have to do is get to that door and get out of this place. Fuck her phone, fuck her purse. The only thing that mattered, escape. A second muffled voice shouted at the first voice, and there was a sound like someone had thrown something heavy against a wall. The sound was followed by more muffled sounds that she couldn't quite identify. Eve turned her attention back to the direction she was moving. She could see the front door now. She lunged towards the exit and tripped over something on the floor. She felt hard in a heap on the cold, hard concrete. The room began spinning. She couldn't black out again. She had to escape. She heard the door open behind her. The sound shot a rush of adrenaline through her body. She leaped up off the floor and tried to fling the door open, but it only creaked a crack before stopping. The chain lock had stopped the door from opening all the way, and the unexpected change in the motion almost sent her crashing back to the ground. There was shouting behind her now. She let out a scream and slammed the door shut so she could unlatch the chain lock. The shouting behind her was getting closer. She managed to get the chain unlatched from the door. Once again, she flung the door open and was momentarily blinded by the bright sunlight outside. She scrambled into the light, the rough exterior pavement cutting at her bare feet. She spotted some concrete stairs that she assumed must lead to the street and ran up them before she knew what she was doing. At the top of the steps, there was a waist-high, locked, rusty iron gate that tore her skirt as she climbed over it. Still panicking, she scanned her surroundings. She didn't recognize this neighborhood, but she had seen many like it. The architecture in D.C. was, in many ways, interchangeable and predictable. Sometimes the only way to tell the difference between the good and bad neighborhoods was by looking at the types of cars that lined the streets or the demographics of people who walked the sidewalk. This neighborhood didn't have many cars, but there was a large group of young black men crowded around a charcoal-colored Escalade at the corner. The sound of the blaring bass of the rap music coming from the Escalade echoed down the street, and the sticky scent of marijuana and urine filled her nostrils. Eve frantically ran in the opposite direction of the men on the corner, hoping to see a street name or even just a landmark that she might recognize. She had to get out of there. She needed to find a cab or at the very least a metro station. She made it to the end of the block when it occurred to her she didn't have her purse or her phone. Gasping for breath, she swayed as she tried to collect herself. How was she going to get home? Was she being crazy? Should she go back? Maybe she was wrong about the situation. She didn't remember how she had ended up there, but that didn't automatically mean she had been. She started crying. She knew how it must look. A white girl wearing a torn dress, barefoot and sobbing in this neighborhood. People would probably think she was crazy or homeless. What had happened last night? She looked up at the street sign on the corner, but before she could focus on the letters, she doubled over and vomited. Eve's vision blurred, and she vomited again. She wiped her eyes and then her mouth and forced herself to stop crying. The odd, temporary soberness produced by her vomiting allowed her to focus on the street sign long enough to read and just get her bearings. She wasn't far from the U Street Metro. It was just west from here. She would head in that direction. As Eve stumbled in the direction of the metro station, she began to calm down. Maybe it was just shock, or perhaps she was finally sobering up. She wasn't sure. The rational part of her brain was sitting behind the wheel once again. She began to have a nagging, sinking feeling that maybe she had this all wrong. The man she had seen back at the apartment hadn't attacked her. He didn't even threaten her. He had just assumed the worst, and for the worst reasons. She had to admit it to herself. She had acted entirely out of bigotry. She was a racist. If he had been white, would she have felt the same panic? Would she have run like a crazy person? She'd woken up in strange places before and not behaved anything like this. Was it her unconscious bias that had made her panic? She was being a stupid white girl. Eve stopped and turned to look down the street the way she came. I should go back. I should go back and apologize. I'll get my phone and my purse and apologize for my racist behavior. I was a guest, and I repaid their hospitality by acting like a crazy bitch, she thought to herself. Eve took a few steps back in the direction of the apartment she had fled. Once again, the pain between her legs intensified. She felt the world spinning and reached out to grab anything she might use to steady herself with. Her hand came into contact with an iron trash can that was chained to a tree. She gripped it hard, her hand touching something slimy that was caked on the inner rim of the bin. She fell backwards, pulling the trash can down on top of her with a bang. Everything went black. The last thing she heard, before completely blacking out, was the sound of tires screeching. End of chapter 6.